From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm Robert Newland from the Law Library. It is with great honor that we welcome former U.S. Representative Patricia Schroeder to join us today for an interview with the Deputy Librarian of Congress, Robert Dysart, Jr. Before we begin the program, I would like to thank Bill Burton, founder of the Burton Foundation, for his generous support for making this program possible today. Additionally, I'd like to recognize Professor Ryan Musgrave, Director of the Rollins College Honors Program and Chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion. Professor Musgrave and Congresswoman Schroeder co-teach in equity issues in U.S. legislation at Rollins College. Ryan, where do I see you? There you are. Thank you. It's very fitting that Bob Dysart is here today to interview Congresswoman Schroeder about her many accomplishments, most especially her years on Capitol Hill. Prior to joining the library, Mr. Dysart served for 8 years as Chief of Staff to his hometown Congressman, Guy V. Molinari of New York. Mr. Dysart was appointed Deputy Librarian of Congress on June 17, 2012, coming up for an anniversary, after serving in a number of leadership positions in the library, including Chief of Staff. Mr. Dysart will now introduce Congresswoman Schroeder.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And I also want to welcome Ms. Schroeder back to the old neighborhood.
Thank you, thank you.
What I'm going to do is, hopefully in the course of our discussion, you'll know a lot more about former Congresswoman Schroeder and her career here, particularly on the Hill. I think when I was talking to people about this event, I came across quite a few people of all ages who did not need an introduction to Pat Schroeder, so, which is really great to hear. So I'm going to start off. We don't have nearly enough time to go through the whole career, but I told Pat I'd like to focus on her years in the House. When you were first elected in 1972 to the House, you had not spent prior years as a state legislator or a city legislator, city official, and at 32, you were the second youngest woman ever elected to the House of Representatives. We're all shaped in some part by our childhood and early adult years, but when you entered the national legislative arena, those early years were not that far behind you. And so I'd like to start with a brief overview of the years before you started to study at the University of Minnesota. And you said both your parents were, and I'll quote, full of spunk with a sense of adventure and a willingness to take risks. What were your pre-college years like, your growing up years?
Well, I was born in Portland, Oregon, and I probably would have lived and died in Portland, Oregon, but for World War II. My father had an airport, a private airport on something called Swan Island. It's now an industrial park or something. But anyway, when Pearl Harbor happened, the government nationalized the airport and called him up to teach flying in the then Army Air Corps. So we were moved to Dallas, we were moved to all over. We were moved to Kansas City first and then Dallas. So when the war was over, we were in Dallas. And my dad decided to go into aviation insurance instead of running an airport because now they were going to be municipal from that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so first of all, there was never a federal form long enough to fill out all the places that I lived because of that. So my dad went to work in Ohio in an aviation insurance company, and then he decided to start his own in Iowa. So I graduated from high school in Iowa, and I had gotten a pilot's license because the family always flew, and he felt everybody should know how. And I ended up going to the University of Minnesota because my father felt the most important thing about my going to college was my paying my own tuition. I didn't quite agree with that, but he did. So I was busy trying to figure out how I could make enough money to get through school.
Right.
Well, the University of Minnesota at that time, in the wonderful Nordic fairness thing that they had, said, well, we have these champion aircraft. They're for men only because of the ROTC, but the government doesn't say we can't rent them to you. So I got a job adjusting aviation losses for an insurance company in Minneapolis, and that's how I worked my way through college. And then I went on to Harvard Law School because I had no idea what I wanted to be.
I'm going to just go back a little bit more to your childhood. You mentioned that you were a pilot at a very young age, 15, 16?
15.
And could you just describe, you had a bit of an adventure on your first solo landing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Sometimes I'm not as observant as I should be. I had a very large instructor. So when it was time to solo and he got out, I started coming around, and I was always way above the airport when I suddenly realized, oh, I don't have as much weight. I got to bring this thing in lower. No, I learned a lot of things very fast.
And you, one of your notable, I don't want to say trademarks, but it involves your signature, where you put, maybe this was a precursor to emoticons, but you put a happy face in the P of Pat.
Right.
That came from your early years.
In Dallas, Texas. I started first grade, and there were 5 Patricias in my class. And so the teacher said, okay, line up. You're going to be Pat, you're going to be Patty, you're going to be Patsy, you're going to be... And I ended up being the Patsy. And I said, somehow I don't feel like a Patsy. Could I put a face in the P, and that would distinguish me? You know, I really feel that I want to be a Pat. And so luckily she said yes.
Right.
So it stayed with me. It drove people crazy when I was in Congress. When will she grow up? Right. Why does she do this? That's just terrible.
So you would put the 2 eyes and a
little smiling face.
Little file in the P. Okay.
Blame my first grade teacher wherever she is.
Okay. Then also at Minnesota, was it at Minnesota where you studied Chinese?
Yes, I did.
But you credited that as a confidence builder, basically saying.
It was. Yeah. And unfortunately, the class was usually early in the morning, and we even had to do the characters. And we had an egg in here with the brush to hold your hand properly. And I was always breaking my egg and running my sleeve through it. So I think I went through college with dried egg.
Okay. And now we get to Harvard Law School. You've said that I had an absolutely miserable time at Harvard. Why was that?
Well, I had gone to Minnesota where I flew airplanes, and you know, Minnesota had this theory of, look, you're here, you're an adult, you either come or you don't, and if you don't, you fail, and that's it. So, you know, and I showed up the first day at Harvard, and they said, you have assigned seats, and I had young men on either side of me, and they said, we have never sat next to a girl in our entire education, and we're having our seats changed. And I thought, really? I mean, most of the young men in my class then had gone to sex-segregated education their entire life. And, you know, being in this wonderful library reminds me, I remember going to the Harvard Law Library to do some work. And a couple of these guys came over and said, do you realize you're sitting in the most important law library in America, and you are taking a position from a man? And I'm like, yeah, okay, so get over it. You know, I mean, what am I supposed to do about that? But there was this real, you know, we're here and we can't believe you're here messing it up. It was like the estrogen that I brought to the room was going to cause them all to, I don't know what.
Right. And you met your husband, Jim, at Harvard. He was at Harvard
did.
Law School, too, and I should note, in a library.
Absolutely.
Now, I know.
I spent a lot of time in the library, yeah.
Yeah. I know each of you has written memoirs of your congressional years, and looking at both of those, I just wanted to get a clarification on that particular experience, because Jim Schroeder described the meeting as this way. One Thursday evening in late October or early November, I was studying at Langdale Library when Pat walked in. She stopped by the table where I was working, apparently looking for a particular law volume that was in the stacks. She smiled, and I asked her if I could be of assistance. Yes, she said. Could you please get a volume down from the top shelf? I, of course, did. We chatted quietly for a few minutes, and then I suggested we go out for dinner Saturday. She said, great, and we were set for our first date. In the Congresswoman's memoir, it was, the only bright part of law school was Jim, who came up to me one day in the frigid library and introduced himself. So I wanted, in the National Library here, I wanted to give, I wanted to give the former Congresswoman a chance, as they say in the House, to revise and extend the remarks. It's the only kind of different outlook that I saw between the two of you.
See, I always said to him, he had been in the Navy for 3 years, and he went to Princeton.
Right.
And so I think it's my way, because I kept saying, you couldn't manage co-ed Harvard.
Yeah,
I mean, there were a whole 15 women in the place.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Okay.
And so I think he approached me.
Okay, got it, okay. The dispute continues.
Yes,
yeah, okay. And so after law school, you and Jim moved to Denver. How did you get to Denver, and what initial jobs did you have there?
Well, we sat down and tried to decide where we were going to live. You know how that goes? Jim was from Chicago, and I said, I spent winters in Minneapolis, and I don't think I want to spend winters in Chicago, too. So I want something warmer. We looked at the East Coast, and we said, oh, that looked fairly stuffy. And we kept interviewing offices that said, well, we'd probably have to take both of you. And we thought, we really don't want to be the Bobbsey twins, working like that. So that became a problem. So finally we said, Denver's a good compromise. You know, it's wonderful. It isn't quite as cold as some of the other places, and it's outdoor, and it's young people, and why not? So we did.
Good, okay. And so you worked for the National Labor Relations Authority?
I did. I worked for the NLRB, and he went to work in a law firm.
In a law firm, right. Okay.
Again, for the same reason. The law firms all said either together or we'll have conflicts.
Right.
And so then I thought, well, I'll go to work for the IRS, because my specialty had been tax law. And they said, well, the closest you can live to your husband is Albuquerque. And I thought, well, that's not going to work too well.
Okay.
So I ended up at the National Labor Relations Board.
Now, in 1970, your husband ran for a state legislative seat.
Did.
Lost by very narrowly 42 votes.
Right.
But you were not necessarily active politically, but in 1972, your husband was part of a group that was trying to get a candidate to run against Republican Congressman Mike McKevick, who was a freshman and had unseated a long-time, maybe 20-year incumbent, Byron Rogers, in 1970. How did your name come up for that race?
Oh, my. Well, we had a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I had lovely part-time jobs. That was wonderful. I was doing I was a hearing officer for the state of Colorado in labor cases, and also I was teaching part-time at the university. So that was all fine, and I'm perfectly happy with my life. He's on this committee looking for someone to run. Now, the incumbent, they had just gone through reapportionment and redrawn the district so it'd be even safer for him. So everybody they got a hold of said, I'm not into being a sacrificial lamb. Thank you very much, but no. And they did have one person who was going to run. He was the state minority leader, and everybody kind of gotten behind him. And the idea was, he thought he could run even to the right of this guy, which was almost impossible because the guy had a 0 liberal rating. So, you know, anyway, on and on it went. So he comes home one night from one of these meetings. Now, this is how desperate they were. And he says to me, guess whose name came up? And I said, I don't know. He said, yours. I said, mine. I haven't run for a bus. Yeah. You know, what do you mean? And he said, no, you'll never win. Yeah. But it's so important. And he said, and you're always telling those young students they ought to get out there. You really ought to get out there. Well, it was amazing because it all happened really fast. My parents happened to be on one of those people-to-people tours to Thailand. And when my mother comes back to Denver, somebody says, did you know your daughter announced for Congress? She literally dissolves on the floor. It's like, I can never leave town again. What, has she lost her mind? But anyway, the rest is history.
So even you thought you wouldn't even win the primary. No, so this was something you'd be doing between May and September.
I never gave up my jobs. Yeah. You know, I mean, still.
So how, that first campaign, how did you was it door to door? Were you in shopping centers, mailings? What was the technique that you used in that first campaign?
Well, think about this. My average campaign contribution was $7.50. It was in the basement. Our campaign headquarters is in the basement. We had a whole group of people that were friends that sat around the dining room table, and we called ourselves Kitchen Table Media. So when somebody said, you know, who's doing your media, I'd say Kitchen Table Media. And usually people would say, oh, I've heard of them. You know, I mean, so. But I remember PBS came out to film this thing because it was like and they couldn't believe it either. But, you know, we were just having a really good time. And we did really stark, radical posters. I brought them back here and showed them to the DCCC, and they said, did these go out? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, forget about it. We have no money for you. This is crazy. We had, for example, it was the Vietnam War. So we took a picture of the military cemetery with a bird flying over it, and underneath it was a quote from the president saying, yes, many of our troops have already been withdrawn. Yeah, hard hitting, right? Yeah. And again, they were like, oh, you didn't do that. And I said, yeah, we did. We had the Olympics on the ballot, and every single politician said, well, it's wonderful that people can express their opinion, yada, yada, yada. So we had a picture of an elderly woman walking down the streets in Denver with a cane, and under it said, cheer up, the Olympics are coming. Which lost me the Chamber of Commerce and some of the labor unions. And our third poster, because I've always really cared a lot about children, is we took a picture of a migrant child sitting under a crucifix on a dirt floor at about a year old, and it said, this radical troublemaker is out to get something from you. Hope. Well, people loved the posters. It cost us a penny a piece. And, you know, they were all over town. I mean, we absolutely, we had graffiti all over town, our posters. But, and they went on to win a lot of awards. But that was not what anybody wanted. I mean, in Denver, all the politicians' stuff looked the same. You know, you have the picture of the family, and you have the picture of the, with a policeman to show you're for the law and order, and maybe one in the grocery store to show that you're a consumer. And then the only way you could tell if it was Republican or Democrat was the last one, where if it was a Republican, they were on a horse, and if it was a Democrat, they were on a bike. And other than that, you didn't know. I mean, that was it, you know. So this was all so radical. Nobody could believe it, and I just think, I don't have any idea. Well, first of all, I knew a lot of labor guys. Oh, okay. So my husband would talk about driving downtown, and some guy would lean out the window, and he'd have a Nixon Schroeder button. And he'd say, oh, my God. Or some of the construction trades had a thing saying hard hats for a soft broad, which was not, I said, no, those have to go. I mean, so I don't know. It was crazy.
But you also have said your opponent ignored you. I guess.
Oh, he did. He called me Little Patsy, and I was a head taller than he was. Yeah. And he had some wonderful young women that he dressed up in all alike, and they were Mike's girls.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I mean, can you believe that this was going on in the 70s?
Yeah.
And it was fabulous.
Did you feel the race coming towards you at all towards the end, or was it still a surprise on election night?
We never did a poll.
Yeah. And I should say, not only in that race, but ever. You've never done a poll.
No, we've never done a poll.
Right.
Well, you know, people were really enthusiastic that were around me, but
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he was an incumbent, and everybody who knew anything in Washington told me there's no way.
Okay.
And, you know, I had Gloria Steinem came out for me, but I didn't see any other members of Congress show up. The DCCC or anyone. So I just figured I was having a really good time saying what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So I've been doing it ever since.
Ever since.
It was really nice.
So a few months after winning your arrive here in Washington, you obviously have to quickly get to work, including securing committee assignments, desired committee assignments. Can you describe your first impressions here and when you came and talk about the getting on committees?
Well, first of all, I came, you know, during the Vietnam War, so the whole place smelled like tear gas. There were huge demonstrations. It was the Nixon inaugural, and we would go through the tunnels, and they were full of National Guardsmen staying in there. So I was really like, what have I done to my life? And I remember walking into my office, and there were 6 bags of mail, all on the bombings and what was going on. So people forget how that era was. Yeah, the whole thing, members of Congress would say to me, are you a fluke? And they couldn't really quite believe that I had gotten elected.
Yeah.
And the speaker kept trying to swear in Jim, and he kept saying, no, it's her.
Right.
It's her. And everywhere I would go and we would have to line up, they would always come and say to me, no, you don't understand. The member goes in front of you. And I would say, no, I'm the member. And they'd say, no, I know you're a member of the human race, but, you know, no. I mean,
So, but you did try to get on armed services, the Armed Services
try to get
Committee.
on armed
Was
services.
that related to the district, or?
Well, because I was a pilot, and I thought nobody ever talked to women and children about being defended. I felt that everything that I wanted money for, they were going to say, we don't have money for it. Oh, because it's all going into defense. The immense expense is mainly in defense. I won't sing, but you know the deal. So I should be there, and I should look at it. And I also felt very strongly about military families. Nobody ever talked about them. They only talked about hardware. So I thought, well, this is a wonderful idea. It's time we have a woman. That was not exactly what the chairman thought.
Right.
The chairman was F. Eddie Hebert from Nolens, Louisiana, and what we called was a boll weevil back then. And there was also no African Americans on. And Ron Dellums also wanted to get on. So we were both vetoed by the chairman, and they had never overridden a veto of a chairman before. And they overrode it and put the 2 of us on. So the 2 of us walk in the first day, and we're thinking we're pretty smart. You know, we're now on the Armed Services Committee. And the chairman is going off about this is the worst thing that ever happened, and this is terrible, and the Congress has now been ruined, and blah, 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 blah. But his only power that he has left, he says, is how many chairs are at the dais. And these 2 people are only worth half of the rest of you, so they get 1 chair. So we sat cheek to cheek. Got to be quite good friends. Right. And wonderful Barney Frank used to go around introducing me that it was the only half-assed thing that I ever did when I was in Congress. But I think there were many other things that I did that were. But anyway, it was kind of...
And did you did you ask the Congressional Research Service early on?
Yeah.
How long will it be before there are as many women in the House as men?
Absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to know how long before we represented what we were in the population. And they came back with some number around 400 years.
Yeah.
Which I thought was outrageous.
Right.
But you know what?
But it's true at the time.
Maybe true.
You're right.
Maybe right.
Right.
Congressional Research Service is probably nailing it. I don't know.
Yeah. So, let me ask about your initial approach to being a legislator here. Apparently, you didn't say to yourself, I'll work my way up the leadership ladder, that'll be the way I become effective. And it also appears that you had an approach early on. You knew what you were going to do pretty much from the start. Just what was your philosophy of being effective, and when did that come to you?
Well, several things. Number one, I figured that there was really no welcoming committee out there for me, and there were really no mentors. At that time, about half of the women who were in Congress had taken their husbands' seats after they had passed away. And so they had this image they were carrying on their husband's agenda. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, what about the women's agenda and all that? Well, we're not into that. You know, that's girly stuff. And the women's movement was coming alive, and I had very strong feelings about what's happening here. I also had feelings about, okay, I can write an alternative defense budget the way I would write it. My chairman didn't appreciate that. But, you know, I just really felt, well, we were told what you're supposed to do is to be quiet, stay in your seat, keep coming back, and then eventually you get power. And I figured by then I would have forgotten why I came. So, you know, and I never knew how long I was going to be there anyway, so I may as well make noise while I'm here and have a good time.
Right. In your memoir, which has the title 24 Years of Housework and the Place is Still a Mess, you said that I always felt that my job as designed by the Founding Fathers was to listen to people, engage their minds, stir up controversy, and steer clear of sanctimony. Is that pretty much how you handled it?
Absolutely.
Right.
And you know, there's two ways. I think when you're a politician, you so often know what the applause line is.
Right.
And the temptation is so out there to just go and do the applause lines. But, for example, then let's say amnesty was a big issue. So people will come in, absolutely, those people that went to Canada, they ought to be shot, you know, whatever. And so then they'd come in and they'd say, you know, there's this really nice kid in our neighborhood, and he went to Canada, could we get him back? And I'd say, you know, there isn't any way I can write a law that they're all going to be shot and yet bring him back. And it'll be the same with immigration, it'll be the same with anything. People had this really hard, you know, no, we don't want divorce for anyone, or no, we don't want amnesty for anyone, or no, we don't want immigration for anyone, except all these nice people that we know. And you know, I always felt you ought to be educating people on that rather than standing up and going for the applause line.
Right.
So it is the harder way, but I understand, you know, when you do a polling thing, where you're going to go. But if you bring people in, I always have that, I guess it's a faith, but I always have the idea that if you explain to them, well, now look, what we're going to do if we do this, if we take your path, that they begin to understand, and they say, yeah, well, maybe we need a little leeway, or maybe we need to figure out a way they can work their way back, or, you know, whatever.
Right. You've had many legislative accomplishments. I thought maybe we could take one of them, one which we're familiar here with in the library, the Family Medical Leave Act. Can you just take us through and describe your strategy for that and how you got it through, even with 2 presidential vetoes? What was the mechanics of doing that?
Well, I looked at running for president in 1987. I decided not to. And then I did a Great American Family Tour because I was trying to get family medical leave going with a wonderful pediatrician from Harvard, Dr. Brazelton, maybe many of you know him, and Gary Goldberg, who was the producer of Family Ties, the writer, and his wife, Diana Meehan. And the 4 of us went off and we went to these primary states, and we said to people, please write your checks saying, do not cash this unless you're for family leave or something. Well, we had all the candidates saying they're for family leave, including George H.W. Bush, who I really liked, but I don't think he really got what family leave was about, because then we got back and we passed it, and he vetoed it, and then he did it again.
Right.
And luckily, one of the states we had gone to was Arkansas when Clinton was governor. And so when Clinton came in, we finally got it passed. But, it's still so watered down and everything else. I thought, well, think of Americans who, when they saw Prince George born in England, and, there were all those articles about how England is a little backward compared to the rest of the European Union. In England, if you have a baby, you only get 52 weeks of job-protected leave, 39 of which are paid. Now, the other countries have a much better one. You know what we've got? I mean, and I'm almost embarrassed to say that's my bill. Everybody went around saying, isn't this wonderful, we passed this bill? And I'm like, that was 20-some-odd years ago. What have you done since? Could you please beef it up? So it's the frustration of seeing how I don't think there's a capital in the world that talks more about family values and does less.
Right.
And it really bothers me.
With that legislation, there was some need on your part to compromise.
Oh, yeah.
And in your experience in the House, is it more often go for common ground, or is it more often compromise?
No, thank goodness I compromised, or we wouldn't have any family leave at all. I mean, 20 years later, my dream was we compromise and that they start trying to increase it. Right. But at least we have it. Yeah. Which I think is why you want some compromise. At least you get a start and you find out the world didn't stop. I'll never forget the Chamber of Commerce somewhere down in the South when we were trying to get it said, lady, if you pass this, the entire South's going to shut down during deer hunting season. Everybody's going to have their babies so they can get 6 weeks off to go deer hunting. And I was like, really? Well, Southern women are a lot different than Western women, because I don't know anybody who planned their pregnancy around deer hunting season so they could get off. I mean, really? So,
Another thing just on the legislative process, in a 1989 Newsweek article on the world of Congress, you were quoted as saying, the name of the game here is if you have to explain a vote to a significant group of people, you better not make it.
That's exactly the applause line thing.
Is that right? Okay.
You have to explain it. It takes too much time. And to me, that's really what we're supposed to be. Yes, legislators, but also educators. Right, educators as to why legislation isn't so easy. Otherwise, we ought to just legislate by poll. We can poll everyone in America and say, what do you want? Yes, no. Yeah, yes, no. And I really feel we've lost a lot of that we've gotten this really, Right.
And the compromise, there was one incident where you worked with Phyllis Schlafly on increasing exemptions for dependents. Right. And I think they had the two of you on the front page of the New York Times, and your office got flooded with how could you do this?
I know. But, how could you sell out and even be in the same room?
Right.
A stop clock is right twice a day, and so you work with who you work with to try and get something done, and it's terribly important.
Right.
Okay. One of the things that I feel very bad about. One of the things that I worked very hard on and I never got done was safe motherhood. This is the 100th anniversary of Margaret Sanger having started contraceptive clinics on the basis that was for preventive health for women. And here we are 100 years later, and the Supreme Court's still deciding, is contraception really preventive health? Meanwhile, in the last 25 years, according to UNICEF, maternal deaths have doubled in America, and we are 50th universally, right below Serbia. And we don't talk about the maternal health issues. I mean, people in America watched Downton Abbey and watched one of the characters die of preeclampsia, and people would say to me, well, what's that? Do we have that in America? I said, yeah, we got that in America. I know 3 people who had it. Oh, really? Do we do any research? No, because our image is everybody's a safe motherhood here. And you know, so those kind of issues, women's issues I found particularly difficult. Family issues, very difficult. And I think it's still that way because I think Congress thinks of itself as the most important and powerful legislature and the most important capital, which is true. And so we only deal with important issues, and that's not family and that's not female.
Let me just ask you, and you've exhibited this just in this brief discussion too. You had a reputation for an imaginative and sometimes biting wit. Referring to President Reagan, I think it was on the House floor, you said, I was cooking breakfast this morning for my kids, and I thought, he's just like a Teflon frying pan. Nothing sticks to him.
That's right.
You've probably have repeated many times to questions we could guess. I have a brain and a uterus, and I use both.
Yeah.
President George H.W. Bush had the coattails of a bikini, I think you mentioned after the '88 election.
Actually, it was McGovern.
Oh, it was McGovern, okay.
Was wearing a bikini.
To some of your Pentagon allies on the House Armed Services Committee, if you guys were women, you'd always be pregnant. You just can't say no. Now, I think you obviously use these to effect. What was the strategy behind these 1 or 2 liners? I mean, you weren't just standing up to get laughs. They were effective in a lot of ways.
You know, I always figured my words should be tender and juicy because I often had to eat them. But
okay.
Basically, one of the real problems I always had in Congress was I felt that we became so wonkish. We wanted to throw 50 pages at everything in a society it's America. And if you weren't born with attention deficit disorder, we teach it to you within the first year of your life. And so you've got to have a word picture that kind of captures where, you know, what you're saying. The other part is, I must say, part of it was I really suffer fools lightly, not very well. And so, you know, when the 85th person says to me, how can you be a congresswoman and a mother? You kind of say, a brain, a uterus, they both work. What else do you want to know? I mean, you know, you just get very impatient with that kind of craziness that women tend to get asked. And I doubt that there's ever been a male asked, how can you be a father and a member of Congress? You know.
Okay. But just can you just briefly describe what your district was like and how much time were you devoting to the national issues versus the district? What did people in the district expect of you and ask of you most?
I had a wonderful district. Denver is one of the most educated cities, young. And the wonderful thing about Colorado is so many people moved in, like myself. Anywhere else I would have been a carpetbagger. Because they wanted to live a better life or they wanted to make things better. And so when we, for example, had tremendous pollution, people were like, fix it. Fix it. Okay, well, we're going to have to do this. We're not going to have fireplaces, you know, burned. You're not going to do this. Fine, terrific. Is there anything else we can do? You know, they didn't fight it. We had an awful lot of oil and gas people. We had a lot of environmental people. My hardest part was I've never been a sports addict. You know, I grew up when girls' basketball was you could dribble twice and not cross the center line. It didn't look like a sport to me. And so I had the unique thing of having one district that had 4 National League teams. So that was my hardest job, was keeping up with the sports part. But the rest of it was, I really found most people were very fair. Now, there were others who, you know, I absolutely drove nuts. but we say out west, you know a person by their enemies. And I had a good list.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as you became a national figure, did that help you with your constituents, or did they say, stop paying attention to that stuff and pay attention to Denver?
No, because I still went back there all the time.
Yeah.
I think they often wished I'd go somewhere else for a while. It's like, God, there she is talking again.
Now, and you mentioned before that in 1987, you were a candidate for president. In fact, Time magazine had you in a poll third among the candidates. If I can ask you to be a bit immodest here, why were people pushing you to run in that race? What were they telling you? You have to do this, Pat, because you're blank.
Well, they weren't pushing me to run. I started out as Gary Hart's co-chair, our chairman, for the presidency. And when all of a sudden monkey business happened, I was furious. I was so furious. And I thought, okay, I've been clearing my calendar and going around and representing him in all these things. I'll just do it myself. It's kind of one of those impassioned moments.
But there was a run, Pat, run movement.
There was. I mean, there were an awful lot of people who said, yes, that's terrific. Remember, this is like 4 years after Ferraro had run. And a lot of us thought, okay, this is great. When Ferraro ran, I was one of them, saying the ticket will never be all male again. We're always going to have diversity. He was wrong. But a lot of us thought that was really going to happen. And so, I looked at it, and then I realized, well, I'd gotten in a little late.
Too late. Because you needed to raise a lot of money.
You need to raise a lot of money, and I had gotten in really too late. I mean, people were all... And secondly, there was still such an attitude. I'll never forget in the South being introduced by a chairman of the Democratic Party saying, I like this woman, is a fine woman. This woman knows more about the military than all those other candidates together, and I don't have any trouble with a woman being president. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I should rethink this. This is the South. And then he said, however, I just can't imagine having a man for first lady. And I'm like, I think I'm going to go shoot myself. And then you've got to get up and give a speech. And the crazy question I kept getting all the time then is, why was I running as a woman?
Right.
And you would say, I don't know what the other options were, and I don't know when I was given them. I missed that. But so I really realized that there were whole parts of the country that had never elected a woman to anything.
Right.
And I was such a novelty act that I couldn't overcome that.
Right.
And I just read a poll, maybe some of you saw it recently, where 11% of Americans still say that they couldn't vote for a woman for president today. And the 23% say they think men are better suited to politics.
Right.
So, we've still got those attitudes out there. It's always hard because most of us don't know those people. I don't know where they're living, but they're answering polls. So,
In the 94 election, the House turned, the majority switched to the Republicans. You did not run in 96. What was the difference in being in the majority for 22 years and then boom, literally overnight, you're in the minority?
It was awful. It is a hard job if you do it right.
Right.
At least, you're commuting 2,000 miles every weekend and you're traveling around and doing all sorts of things. And the thing that makes it worthwhile doing is that you get something to the outbox. It may take a long time, but something finally gets to the outbox and you say, okay, we got family leave, or okay, we got the Women's Health Initiative, or okay, we got, whatever. It became very clear to me that what I felt like all of a sudden was I got up every morning, I got dressed, I came down here, and it was like being in a junior high lunchroom. All I did was be in a food fight all day, with everybody, rah, rah, rah. And then you go home, and you think, nothing is going into the outbox. And it really wasn't. And I was also the co-chair of the Women's Caucus. The Women's Caucus had been the largest bipartisan caucus on the Hill. We had both men and women, both parties. And it kind of got totally uprooted. They said, no, it's got to move off the Hill. You got to have outside sponsors. You can't do the blah, 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 blah. So it really gutted it. And I thought, well, I don't know how we're going to get any of this stuff done. And do I really, you know, I was then 55. There's a lot of ageism in this society, especially against women. And I thought, if I don't leave now, I'll have to be here till they take me out horizontally or something. And I wasn't sure the place was big enough for both me and Gingrich.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, there we were.
Okay. Do you follow congressional deliberations today? Do you flip on C-SPAN and say, let me see how these folks are doing? And
Rarely, because I really find, you know, when I came, it's changed a lot. And I don't want to sound like a crabby old lady saying, well, they're not like they used to be. But when I came, we had some really intense debates about the Vietnam War. I mean, there were people who were for it and people who were against it. And we would argue about why we thought it was a bad idea or why we thought it was a good idea, whatever. And then we'd go to coffee. That doesn't happen. You know, now it's more name-calling, and you wouldn't be near them because it's like some of their terribleness might wipe off on you. Or we were having very strong, I mean, we had impeachment going on, for heaven's sakes. Impeachment of a president. So you can imagine how tense that was. But again, you could have those things, and then you would go see them, or you would walk out, and you'd still be friends. It would be more like a courtroom thing that I was used to. And all of a sudden, it became this incredible polarized. And so I don't really find the debates that informant anymore. I find them much more accusing people of being either Neanderthals or socialists or this or that, you know. So the one thing I know is that when you're flinging labels around, you're not arguing, you're not debating, you're just flinging labels around and hoping they stick.
Could a Pat Schroeder come along today and effectively use the same approach that you did when you came in?
You know, I used to think it couldn't happen, and I must say how pleased I was to see, and I'm sure there are many others too, but let's just take Elizabeth Warren, who ran for the Senate. 80% of her money was $50 or less. So if we as Americans really want to get mad about this, we could do it. I mean, 80% of her money, $50 or less. And she raised more money than anybody running for Senate last time. And I think she's been very outspoken against a lot of special interests, which is terrific, which many people would tell you, oh, you don't want to do that because they give you money, yada, yada, yada. So I always say, excuse me, I'm going to be sexist.
That's okay.
Women are really a hidden potential. You know, we're moving towards the 100th anniversary of women having the right to vote. If every woman in this country wrote a check for what they spent for their last outfit to a candidate that they thought was really good, we could really make some noise and change things. But my feeling was always there's two kinds of people. There's the kind of people who wring their hands and moan about how bad it is, and the kind of people who roll up their shirt sleeves and say, damn it, I'm going to fix this, you know. And we got to change our attitude because I think we're getting much too imbued in the cynicism, and it will never work, and oh, I can't put out that kind of money, so why should I write a check to anybody, and oh, they're all rotten. And that's very dangerous if that keeps spreading, and it's spreading very fast.
After the House, you became the president and CEO of the Association of American Publishers. I mentioned to you before we started here that we could have 3 days of talks on that. You're now living in Florida. And
happiest place on earth.
Right, okay, good. And you're on the board of directors of the League of Women Voters of Florida. So you're still dabbling selectively in the political arena. You're also teaching at Rollins College in Winter Park.
And I'm also on the Common Cause National Board. Poor old John Gardner, you know, he's such a wonderful man. And I'm sure he looks down from heaven and says, oh my gosh, you know, the issues are still there.
Right. Would you mind if we had a few questions from the audience?
No, I love it.
Okay. If somebody, are you raising your hand? Okay, good. We have mics that we'll hand out to folks.
One of the pieces of legislation that I think is one of the most amazing constructions I saw, and a problem-solving kind of thing that was interesting because it involved such a broad span politically of people, was the DoD child care thing that came out of House Armed Services in '87 or '88. And my impression was it was the work of the 5 women who were then on the committee, and they ran the political gamut from you well to the right, 2 Republicans. If it was just 1,000 eaches and there's no way to simplify, it's just waved me off. But is there a short way to tell the story of just mechanically? How did you do that?
Oh, well, it's very easy, and you'll understand it in today's parlance. First of all, most of the members only cared about the hardware. And, you know, I used to go to meetings and they'd say, well, are we going to vote for F-15s or not? Well, how many tickets did they buy to your fundraiser? You know, I mean, really, that type of stuff. And the family stuff, while they always talked about it, they never did much. And so we just kind of did it. And they really didn't pay much attention to it. It was like, oh, you really think this is needed? Now, we also had some wonderful generals and admirals and people tell us that how terribly important this was, that this was a mission issue, that you had more and more married couples that were both working, and if the balloon ever went up, if they didn't have some daycare for the children, what was going to happen? You know, you may not be able to get to your mission. So that helped too. But there were a lot of pieces of it that just all came together. And then the best part that we stuck in there was the pay equity issue, so that the child care workers are some of the highest paid child care workers in America. I mean, there's something wrong with the society that pays its child care workers the least. And we pay usually less than what we pay people who take care of dogs. So that was a very good thing too, and that just brought the whole thing up.
Anyone else?
No
Really?
questions. This is
Okay.
amazing.
Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
but
Go ahead.
right here.
Here
front
comes the
row.
mic.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm wondering if there's a way to incorporate like a civics education component into our schools that would be helpful at this point, and if there's also like maybe a media literacy component that can help us with battling the 24-hour news cycle. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Oh man. Well, I have the civic literacy. Unfortunately, we've got so many states teaching to the test, and if it's not on the test, they don't teach it. And it really is tragic that we don't know. Thank goodness for the library. I'm glad you're doing the Magna Carta, and I'm glad that all the things that are coming. Hopefully, maybe we will learn something, but I think all of us have met new citizens who embarrass us because they know more about how our government works than how we do. So, yes, we do desperately need a citizens. Maybe remember the little song "Bill on the Hill"? And they don't do that anymore in the cartoon hour, and they should, because kids don't even know how the bill gets through the hill, you know, which was great. How I wish. Well, a lot of people are talking about it, but I still don't see much movement. The second part of your question, I'm old and I've now forgotten, which was
Just about media literacy.
oh, media leader. Oh God, yes. Okay. You know, but one of the things when I got elected, one of the things that really helped me, it was back in the old days, way before you were born, when we believed that the public airways were public, and therefore the people who had a license to use them had certain responsibilities. And one of it was the Fairness Doctrine. If you had one side on, you should have the other side. So you can imagine a 32-year-old with 2 children, there was constantly somebody going, you know. And so we would go and ask for equal time, and I could sit there and say, well, here I am, and yes, I have 2 kids, and, you know, this is what I believe in, and so forth and so on. And people say, oh, Well, she's not swinging on a rope and eating bananas like that other people, or the other person said. And that kind of saved me. When Reagan came in, he did away with that with a stroke of the pen. And so now you can attack people 24/7 and they can't even get on, even though they are public airways. And secondly, you can't even buy time if they don't want to let you on. So that is a terrible problem. And there's still a lot of people who believe if they hear it on the radio or hear it on TV, it must be right. No, not so. So media savvy is tough. And I'll tell you, the other thing I worry about so much is the newspapers. We're losing the journalistic newspapers that we had. And if you go back and look at Jefferson, he always said that a strong independent press was very critical for a democracy. So maybe young people like you can figure out what's going to replace that or what's going to come up, because we desperately need it at the moment. We either get stuff fed to us directly by the candidate, and every candidate is for godmotherhood, sunshine, you know, little puppies, whatever. So, you know, you read it all and you have no idea. I mean, what's the difference between candidate A and candidate B? They're all for godmotherhood, little puppies and kids or whatever. The media is either all on one side or all on the other, and so often, and the newspapers have just kind of disintegrated in many places, so you don't have any independent investigation, and that's pretty frightening. If I can define myself, and nobody ever looks into what I'm doing, oh my goodness, I'm going to be the best person you ever heard of, and that shouldn't be.
Anyone else? One more question? Right here, right in the middle. Maybe we can get you a mic. Yeah.
Hypothetical. You're elected president tomorrow. What are your 5 priorities?
5 priorities. Okay. I'm terribly, terribly concerned about the incredible pay disruption, or pay inequity. Hallelujah for Seattle and $15 an hour. 2/3 of the minimum wage workers are women. The lowest paid workers in America are single women with children. Do you think that child poverty might be derivative of that? So those things all, I think, are terribly important. I think it's terribly important to get education back on keel. We're so missing out. When I was with the publishers, I really learned that. I mean, you go to India, we may have MIT. You want to know how many MIT equivalents they've got? And China, and you know, they're out there. And a generation from now, we're gonna really start seeing tremendous problems with this if we don't get focused on it. And if you look at most of our universities, if you want math and science, guess what? It's going to be a foreign student teaching it. I mean, really? Don't we have anybody left in America that can teach math and science as American? It's tremendous neglect there. Those would be 2 very key things. 3, I am obsessed about burden sharing. Totally obsessed about burden sharing. When Eisenhower created NATO, he said, if we've still got troops in Europe 10 years from now, we have failed. Hello? You want to know, we got 120 countries we got troops in. What are we thinking? And you know, there was a wonderful cartoon in the UK paper where these people are coming out of their house, the next door house is on fire, and they said, when are the Americans going to come and fix this? You know, I mean, look, I am more than willing to do our part, but our part's not 99.9%. And you know, I used to rant and rave about this all the time, and if you put the European countries together, they have more people than we do, and they have a higher GDP if you put them all together in the European Union. And what do they do when we have things? I mean, the Belgians sends chocolates, and someone else sends bikes, and someone else sends some films. It's like, come on, people, and now we have a united front. Baloney. I mean, somebody has really got to say it is grow-up time. These things are in your backyard. I mean, I look at the Ukraine. It's like, it's pretty close to you. Serbia and all of that was kind of close to them, and yet we keep coming in. So I would be Madam Burden chairing, and they would hate it. I used to get thrown out of a lot of NATO meetings because it was like the skunk at the garden party. It's like, no, no, no. And our guys are like, no, 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 this is what we do. We're America. You know, we're here to save you, you know, the cavalry. The environment. I realize most human beings can't think beyond 2 generations, but now we're getting to the point where we're pushing it so hard we may even be able to impact both those generations. We really need to be more thoughtful about that. And I salute the president for trying to take it on. And of course, the coal states will scream bloody murder, and everybody else will scream bloody murder, and you may have to pay another penny if you have to use natural gas versus coal. But isn't it nice? Yeah, and overfishing of the seas and everything else. We've really got to think about that. I mean, the Native Americans had it right. We don't own this. We're kind of borrowing it for a while and turning it over. So that would be one. And finally, of course, diversity and all of that, I think, is terribly important in our background. But I am so depressed about the fact that women have still not come up to the level that they should. And we have not dealt with families very equally. And I think what's going to happen is more and more people are going to decide not to have a family. So I think women's and family issues, and they shouldn't be women's issues. In every other country, they're considered both men and women's issues. In this country, they're on the women's pages. You know, it's what do the women want now? Daycare. Well, you know, men want daycare too. And men want, and we've got to bring that whole family thing together. We got to redefine family is wherever you go at night and they let you in. And then we got to figure out, you know, how we, because those are the basic building blocks of this society. And you put those building blocks together and then you put the society on it. Well, if they're crumbling, we're crumbling. So, I mean, those would be my 5. Okay. And I don't think I'll get elected on that platform.
Okay. I'll just wrap up. Yeah. I want to thank you again for coming to the Library of Congress today. We appreciate you talking to us about your life and your career. I think we can learn something from your own experiences. And I just want to close, again, I'm going to cite your husband. I just want to close with this one will be a little different tone. His memoir was called Confessions of a Political Spouse, which was published in 2009. And in there, he told this one story about his wife. He said, I can't remember why now, but at some point many years ago, I needed to get something out of my wife's purse. Very dangerous. Snugged down at the bottom among the hairpins, pens, and Kleenex tissues were several business cards held together with a paperclip. The one on top was for Joe the Balloon Man. One of Pat's favorite things was to order up balloons for our children's birthdays, especially embarrassing them when they got older and the deliveries took place at college or at work. On the back of the card was Shimon Peres's private direct line phone number written in his own hand. A small thing, a calling card with 2 important phone numbers, said a great deal about Pat Schroeder. A sense of humor, fun, and the importance of family. Keep Joe's card handy. A desire to work for peace and justice in the Middle East. Keep Shimon's number available. Tender and tough, Pat Schroeder. Thank you again, Congresswoman. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you both. Ms. Schroeder, thank you so much for the plug for the Magna Carta. That's a great segue into just reminding everyone on November 6th, we'll be opening a major exhibit, 800 Years 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. We're bringing over one of the 1215 Magna Cartas and showing 60 treasures from our collections here at the library. And our next law library program will be July 8th, a Magna Carta theme, Trial by Jury, Magna Carta and Influence in Criminal Law and Legal Representation at 1 o'clock, so we hope you'll join us then. We have a couple of law library staff at the back with iPads that will be taking a survey. We're always trying to improve our programs and look for new topics. Thank you both again, and thanks to you all for coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.